I've read Aristotle's Poetics, where he talks about play structure and the structure of story. It was written about 2,300 years ago, so it's really kind of been developed over time. But he created the idea of a beginning, a middle, and an end, which became the three-act structure. With the three-act structure, we have kind of these common ideas about an intro or hook. We also have things like the climax. You have a denouement. I'm sure a lot of you are already understanding what these things are. But I want to show how the 7 steps that I talked about in the beginning, how they actually incorporate into a 3-act structure. And so within your hook or your intro, it's usually an intriguing start to your story. It's like their first sentence has to be amazing, has to draw readers in. It's also showing the hero's weakness, and it's shown through an example. And it could be like in the Hunger Games, there was a scene where a woman wakes up in bed and she reaches over and there's nobody there. That's a very common technique used in a lot of different TV episodes everywhere, where someone is reaching out for something and they're not there. They're alone. The idea of exposition in a sentence, this is really building your story world. Then we move into the exciting incident. This is where the event that launches the hero's desire in this story, what they want to accomplish, what they're looking for. Sometimes in other structures, they try to someone like the hero's journey, where they say the hero refuses the call, which means they have this desire, but they don't want to do it. But then a mentor comes in and kind of pushes them along so they actually do it. You also have something called plot points. You have multiple of these where the opponent is making moves to undermine the desire of the hero, causing the hero to find a strategy to plan, hint, hint, to defeat this opponent. Then we have something called a plot reveal. And the plot reveal is probably the most important part of the planning and the middle parts of your story. Revealing the reveals is actually a key to plots. Are the reveal. The hero learns something new about the opponent in each renewal, and through we see this a lot in mysteries. Obviously, when a detective uncovers a clue, they kind of learn something about their opponent. They also get a sense of how big their problem actually is. It's slowly unfolding. In other cases, the reveal can show something about the hero's idea about how the opponent wants to do it. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. You can do plot twists with it. You can actually just keep it straightforward. The other idea is the subplot. We kind of talked about this again. It's the side story that unfolds into the main story. And it's also carrying a variation of the theme that you've already thought about in your theme line. And this is a way so you can compare and contrast your hero through another character. So the middle of your story is called the midpoint, and this is the point where it's no return. The hero can't stop now. There's a position where he is in that he cannot move forward unless he buckles down and does it. And this often happens with when the hero plan fails. It's the midpoint in Star Wars is when I think Princess Leia is kidnapped and she's brought onto the Death Star, and the Death Star went over to her planet and blows it up. So now the stakes are high at this point. Realize that the opponent, Darth Vader, has just blown up a planet and he's ready to blow up some more. And so the heroes have to do something. They can't just say, well, my weakness is too strong, so I'm gonna go back to tuning. No, they have to actually go forward. And that brings us to a climax, or the final battle scene. This is where Luke Skywalker is in his X-Wing and he's flying right into the Death Star. And he has to, and he's actually has to overcome his weakness. Remember that point where his mentor is like, use the Force, right? That's the whole point, where he doesn't no longer rely on his natural reflexes. He's using the Force, and that is overcoming his weakness. And then after the Death Star blows up, we have the denouement. He undergoes a self-realization of who he is as a person, that he can use the Force for good, and he's going to continue to drive forward to do that. And then the epilogue of that Star Wars scene is a new equilibrium, where they're given medals on the stage, and they realize that they've done some profound change. Okay. So here, we're actually going to talk a little bit more about structure here. So there's a lot of these different things. What I've realized about studying structure is there's always some sort of process involved. And what I have here is a couple different examples of what I'm calling prefab story structures. You can essentially just go to any bookstore, look up story structures, and you get a whole bunch of these. And I don't feel comfortable endorsing either one of these because I feel that what you want to do in the beginning of this lecture was once you figure out your storytelling structure, your storytelling method, then you can start to look at what type of story structure prefab that you want to go with or come up with your own. So here we have on the left is just that basic 3-act structure that we just reviewed. But over here we have the hero's journey. This is Joseph Campbell's mythic structure. If you haven't heard about it, you should check it out. Star Wars is definitely built on this 100%. But Joseph has his critics, and we have over here The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, who realized that Joseph Campbell's hero's journey was too masculine, didn't really beat up to the standards of what a woman is dealing with in the real world. So she built her own, and she came up with her own interpretation of the heroine's journey. The last one I want to talk about is the 22-step story structure. This is by John Truby. This is his anatomy of story style of story structure. And you notice that what I've just talked about is the weakness and need, desire, opponent, all these that are in red, what he considers the minimum points you need to have in your story. So if you're writing a short story, just follow these red points. But if you're writing a novel, then you might want to consider looking at these 22-step ideas. Now, I don't have enough time to go through every single plot step, but I want to show you the proportion of how these things work. So on the left side, you see these boxes of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and these are kind of roughly the proportional to the list here. So we know with Act 1, we're almost getting into the inciting incident here, and then we start to shift into Act 2 with desire and allies and opponent. And then you notice in Act 3, we start with kind of about the battle point. This is really the climax of your story is going to hit about here, and then you have the self-realization and a new equilibrium. So essentially, this is like a spectrum of how and when your story needs to happen. The cool thing about this is that you can remove certain points. So maybe you don't need this, you can take it out. I don't need that, take that out. Or you can add double. You can take this, I need to have a third, maybe a fourth, or even a sixth, or even an eighth revelation. That's okay. You can actually customize it based on the story structure that you're looking for. So you always want to look back to your premise line, your storytelling method, and seeing how you want to structure your story. And then you have to do a little bit of research and figure out what kind of story structure you're going to look for. So the last thing I want to talk about is the 3-act structure is really based on something called the golden ratio. And with visual artists and designers, the golden ratio is pretty much mandatory that we learn. And what's interesting is when I was researching this, I didn't even realize that this was happening until I started to see the proportions of storytelling. And when I started to see that, I really realized that the 3-act structure is really kind of proportioned based on the golden ratio. So what we have here is basically this curve. I think you've seen this in maybe Nautilus shells, but it kind of moves in like here. And what these other curves are is just basically the same curve divided by itself. So it's the golden ratio divided by the golden ratio. You get this perfect curve here, and another one, and another one, and another one. And what we notice here is the first act kind of hits right in between here, and also the third act really and the climax hits right at the edge of this. Now I want to show something to you that I've actually been working on. This is a idea I came up with about the golden ratio structure, and essentially it's called signposting. And this is a technique in which if you're doing a first draft and if you know how many words you need to write, you basically just type this in, say 6,000 words, and it already gives you a sense of where you need to go based on your story. So you have your inciting incident. This means that in 450 words, 540 words, you need to hit your inciting incident point. And then around 3,700 words, you need to hit your climax. And then by the moment you start to wind things down around the 4,500 mark. And these are essentially rough estimates so that you can essentially put certain scenes where you want. And when you write, you are organically writing your own stories. And these numbers are going to shift after a while. And that's okay, because what you're doing is you're just taking this ideal structure and you're going to write, and you're going to use it as just as a caliper to see how far you need to develop your story. It's like measuring the structure of your story. You can also do it by scene count. So if you don't know how many words you have, but I know I need to write 20 scenes, it can give you a sense of that well. So this is all using the golden ratio, and I did all the calculations by hand. So it's just kind of did all the math for you. And I also have another tool here for you. It's called the story length calculator. So let's say you did write your story and you're trying to figure out, do I need to write more or less? And so what you can do here is you basically plug in the number of main characters that you have. So let's say you have 3. And if you know a rough number of your scenes, maybe 17, and you have to type in the amount of mice threads. So this is a different concept of how you think about structure. And so it's really about what your plot is doing. And so each thread, there's 4 different types of threads. There's one that's called milieu, inquiry, character, and event. So milieu is any story that involves around travel, like a journey story. So Huckleberry Finn is a milieu because Huckleberry sits on a raft and he goes down river and he meets all these different people, right? And an inquiry is a question or truth. There's usually like a detective stories. Character is about the internal angst and and suffering and joy, the transition from being selfish to being benefactorial, and the events such as action stories like war stories. Now, basically, most stories don't have just one milieu mice thread. They usually have multiple ones. So what you would have to do is if you did write your first draft or you have an outline, you just count how many you actually have. You might have 2 milieus. You might have one character on one side of the earth and another character on the other side of the earth, and they all kind of meet at the center. And those 2 different travels are what you're writing about. So that would count as 2 milieus. But then maybe you have some sort of truth that these 2 characters are trying to figure out. So maybe that's actually 2 more. So you would count those as 4. And so what it does some fancy math that I came up with, and it boils out at a 40,000 word story. From there, you can probably, and these are estimates, okay? So from there, you can try to plan your story a little bit more. Because I got to hit the 60,000 mark. Maybe I need to add a couple more characters. Oh, okay, not that much. Okay, maybe not that much. You get the picture, right? There we go. That's a little better. So that gives you a sense of what you could do to beef up your story if you need to, or if you want to take it from a short story to a novel, like what's going to need to happen? Do I need to increase this number? Maybe. So that is that. I am open to Q&A if you want, or we can just cut it off and go home.
Shout out, guys.
That was so good. Great job. Ben for mayor.
Hey, by the way, the mice thing, sci-fi instead of what was that one for I? It is an idea, and they also said in the sci-fi thing for mice, milieu, idea, character or event. You'll have all of those in one story, okay? But one will be more prominent. Like you're talking about, I'm talking about Samantha in my story, that type of thing. She has most of the scenes, and the bad guy, Mr. Mook, is there, and her cohort, Oliver, is there too. Wow. Adding fire, adding the stuff to make the fire hotter. Okay, so that type of thing. So you'll have all of those things in there. So there you go. Thank you very much. I thought you did a wonderful job, kind sir.
Oh, thank you.
and I can't wait for the next thing that you produce.
A quick question. You said that the Truby book was The Anatomy of Story. Is that right?
Yes, so I have it right here. So this is the cover.
Awesome.